Good morning, everyone. We are starting on time. It's 10 o'clock, our time. And I'm delighted to invite all of you to the 4th annual conference of our Society for the Study of Religions in Israel. And we are having a very delightful conference today. I hope so. We have a lot of participants from all over, and we have a number of key issues to treat, and a very complex structure of the conference, indeed. We are beginning today with our main panel, and we begin with Itamar Greenwald with Ritual Considered opening remarks, and then we'll move on to greetings by Mr. Jonathan Tzvi, Verblovsky family representative. And then we'll have the keynote speech by Dr. Niels Billing from Uppsala University on ritual and transformation in the ancient Egyptian pyramid texts. As you have seen, all of you are mute right now, except for the key speaker and the co-hosts. We'll have time to ask questions after the keynote speech, a quarter of an hour. Please either raise your hands or write on chat beforehand your questions, and I will dictate the questions to the keynote speaker. So I'm opening the stage to Professor Itamar Greenwald for his remarks, introductory remarks. Please, Itamar, you can start. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to Professor Amos Meged. I will start with a few words in Hebrew and then proceed in English. And I have made a PowerPoint presentation of my remarks on the screen. Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Yes, okay. אני מתכבד לפתוח את הכנס הרביעי של האגודה הישראלית לחקר דתות, ובמילים במשפט או שניים להודות לחברי צוות ההיגוי ובראשם לפרופסור עמוס מגד, לפרופסור חנוך בן פזי, לנירה פנצר, למשה בליטשטיין, ולמזכיר האגודה לשי אופיר, על המעורבות שלהם בארגון הכנס, שזה בעצם השכפול של הכנס שהיה אמור להתקיים בשנה שעברה, ואני מאחל לכולם יום נעים. אצלנו בירושלים היום זה עוד חלק מחג הפורים, אז חג שמח, ובריאות טובה בהמשך. אני עובר לדבריי באנגלית, אבל קודם אני עוד רוצה להודות ליונתן צבי ורבלובסקי, שמייצג כאן את משפחת ורבלובסקי, שהרימה תרומה משמעותית מאוד לאגודה ולפעילותה, ומעורבת באופן פעיל במה שקורה ומתוכנן באגודה. תודה רבה לצבי, ואני מבקש גם להעביר את זה למשפחה. My opening remarks will focus on methodological issues that show the relevance of ritual theory to the study of rituals. As a quick look at the table of contents of this conference shows, the scholarly discussion of rituals often inclines to highlight phenomenal and descriptive aspects of the subject matter. Various rituals are discussed in their own cultural and religious context. Furthermore, the scholarly routine of discussing ritual generally refers to the labels which stand for the performative, mostly ceremonial aspects of the ritual under discussion. However, discussions relating to the questions of how rituals do what they are expected to do, that is, questions of ritual theory, are generally sidelined. One of the changes that came about as a result of the new orientation in the scholarly discussions concerns the reassessment of the alleged predominance of religious rituals. If we accept the notion that rituals should be studied in their own right, then their doing essence receives priority, whether it is religious or not. Admittedly, rituals that fold in or as cultural entities and events, although rituals are more likely to be part of a religious layout, the doing call is present in almost every kind of human activity that involves a doing protocol, a manual, a recipe. Basically, rituals are behavioral entities that reflect the mind set on applicable procedures that aim at accomplishing transformation in various forms of existence. Consequently, rituals should be studied as anthropological entities and abandon their religious or cultural setting. In short, religions are not necessarily the only domain or venue in which ritualized forms of behavior unfold and function. On the contrary, if rituals are structured forms of behavioral activity that shapes various domains in human life, religions are a notable, though not a singular sample of their applicable presence. Being aware of this fact brings us closer to realizing that rituals should be studied in the framework of their embedded behavioral, embedded behavioral doing setting, disregarding any alleged ideology or meaning. If the behavioral essence is accepted, rituals are best assessed in the context of processual extensions of the human mind. In other words, no theological or ideological consideration need to be applied in assessing the very doing essence of rituals. Key issues in this respect are what to do and how. In this respect, matters that concern the order of the various segments of each ritual should receive full attention. Furthermore, questions like who is obliged or entitled to do, and what are the appropriate conditions for doing are as relevant as any other questions in the assessment of the doing aspect of rituals. In other words, questions that concern the structure of and the processual conditions for doing rituals, and hence their perception as effective wholes applicable in the transformative events. In short, each ritual constitutes a uniquely functioning cosmos that manages unique transformative factors. Finally, in this connection, clusters of ritual clusters of rituals build cultic events which are usually related to specific locations and times. In other words, once the strictures connected with the prejudice that were relinquished, a closer and more constructive look at ritual in general became possible. Consequently, new questions came up, mainly those that concern the performative doing aspects of rituals. Furthermore, theological considerations have lost their primacy in the study of rituals. Instead, questions relating the social setting of the doing aspects of ritual moved to the center place in the discussion. All this had its effect on matters of ritual theory and the assessment of the transformative role of rituals. To make matters clear, unlike the theological study of ritual, which concentrates on issues of meaning, the social anthropological approach emphasizes the activity of the human mind in trying to address issues that require behavioral change. In other words, the mind is set on bringing into effect modes of doing that create a change or sustain a reality. In this respect, matters of daily routine can take on ritual configuration that, in principle, are not far removed from these that are applied and shape culture and religion. In other words, when studied in their own doing modes, rituals are viewed in their essence and structured doing entities which enforce functional coherence. In short, ritual unfold in the context of their own and unique cosmos. The study and the assessment of that cosmos is the essence of the study of rituals in the framework of ritual theory. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Itamar. And I'm opening the stage to Jonathan to give us some greetings on behalf of the Verblovsky family. Thank you.
Good morning. It is my honor and pleasure to speak to this impressive attendance of this 4th annual conference of the Israeli Association for the Study of Religions. I thank the association for inviting me to speak shortly about my father, Professor Rafael Yehuda Tzvi Verblovsky. The Israeli Association for the Study of Religions continues the work of the Israeli Society for the History of Religions, which was founded by my father, one of the many projects and establishments he founded and collaborated with in the field of religious studies in the Israeli Academy and worldwide. Upon my parents' Aliyah in 1956, actually their return to Israel, as they both spent their childhood years here before the independence of the State of Israel, my father founded the Department of Comparative Religion at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and he also held the Martin Buber Chair in Religious Studies at the Hebrew University. He spent most of his life in research, in all remote corners of the earth, and teaching as a visiting professor in many universities around the world and in many languages. He founded the Israel Interfaith Committee in Jerusalem and later founded the Jerusalem Rainbow Club, which served as a place for contacts and discussions between Jewish, Muslim, and Christian intellectuals. He served for a decade as the Secretary General of the International Association for the History of Religions, where he later assumed the position of Vice President. For many years, he was editing Newman, one of the leading journals in the field of comparative religion. It is therefore that we, his 5 children, who grew up in a multicultural and interreligious home, gladly welcome the ongoing cooperation with the Israeli Association for the Study of Religions, actively commemorating our father's vision by financially helping support the association and the establishment of 2 annual Werblowski Prizes for an outstanding doctoral dissertation and an outstanding MA dissertation in the study of religions, to be distributed later this year and as of the next year as part of the annual conference. Encouraging students to excel commemorates our father's great passion for teaching and his pride in his successful students. On behalf of our entire family, I wish to thank the Haifa University for hosting this conference, the Israeli Association for the Study of Religions and its officer, Professor Greenwald and Dr. Ferrao, for organizing it, and I wish all an interesting and successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are moving on time, to our keynote. Professor Niels Billing. Professor Niels Billing, good morning. Please make yourself, oh, okay, you are.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we are. I would like to introduce Professor Billing. Professor Billing is an Egyptologist working on ancient texts and structures in Egypt, and his major works are devoted to deciphering both structures and texts of this ancient culture. We were very delighted to have him on stage with us because our first panel today is dedicated to ancient cultures in the Middle East. And this is, of course, a very welcome lecture on this topic. Thank you very much. You are welcome. Would you like to share with us your PowerPoint? Okay. Okay, thank you.
You can see it?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you very much.
Put it on slideshow. So I start.
Yes, please.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. I'm deeply honored to be invited as a speaker at this conference that in such a beautiful way manages to conquer the shadow of the pandemic under which we all live. But just as the wise Esther once again, just a couple of days ago, gave her people, and indeed us all, hope in a dark and hostile period, let's take this opportunity to exchange some ideas on ritual and transformation in the world of the ancient Egyptian pyramids. Again, I thank you dearly for inviting me. In the following presentation, I intend to present some ideas concerning the symbolic ritual properties as invested in the monumental royal funerary architecture of the older phase of Egyptian history, traditionally called the Old Kingdom. We are then dealing with a time period 2700 up till 2200 BC. In short, I am going to discuss the pyramids and their function as living ritual spaces of transformation for the respective owners. This will involve an attention paid to elements such as architectural configuration, both exterior appearance and internal organization of chamber systems, and eventually the ritualization of the pyramid interior through the physical inscription of the collection of ritual texts known as the pyramid texts on their walls. So instead of looking at these different topics in isolation, that is outer appearance, interior spatial configuration, and texts, I will try to delineate a chronological pattern of an evolution of ideas within the same conceptual frame of transformation, detectable throughout the Old Kingdom. In the end, it will then be demonstrated how the pyramid texts were introduced and thematically distributed into an age-old conception of the symbolic and mythological properties connected to the pyramid. So what architectural evolution are we dealing with? Well, the first king to accomplish the construction of a funerary monument consisting of a pyramid and an adjacent temple complex for the royal cult, completely in stone, was Netjerishet-Djoser, later in Egyptian tradition known as he who opened the stone. The Egyptians were thus fully aware of the ideological implication in this feat of manifesting the king's memory and cult in an eternal building material. Memory could from now on be made time resistant, could be made visible and present. Memory and cult had become monumentalized. Thus, besides from the pyramid, the funerary complex also provided space for comprehensive ritual structures. In fact, dummy edifices, like Potemkin, that in the same way monumentalized a symbolic ritual presence. The ritual in question was a rejuvenation festival called the Hebsed, the Sed festival, ideally celebrated at least once in the lifetime of each ruler, and thereafter forever in eternity. Later texts, they speak about 1 million of Sed fests on behalf of the king. The Mortuary Temple, the living cult of the king's soul, was located on the northern side of the step pyramid. Finally, the pyramid itself covered a complex underground system of corridors and magazines, partly decorated as a royal palace, as you can see in the middle there in the black and white. This was King Djoser's underworld palace. Due to this accomplishment, his accomplishment in teaching the Egyptians how to monumentalize, that is, eternalize their history into an everlasting memory and cult, tradition would make Djoser the founder of the so-called Third Dynasty. Not the least had his architecture under a tutelage of the legendary Imhotep, as you can see to the right, found the formula to construct solid pyramid structures through inward-leaning layers towards a central core, built in the way you can see on the top, in the center. However, only a century after Djoser, there would be a thorough change of paradigm in constructing pyramids. The outer appearance would be transformed into its classical forms with smooth, straight sides, a change that actually took some effort to learn and at first resulted in construction disasters under King Snofru, the founder of the Fourth Dynasty. We don't need to go into detail, just as certain that the step pyramid, the layer pyramid, for some reason had become hopelessly obsolete. So why this new type of pyramid, although it provided such severe engineering problems and troubles? We do not need to pay attention to, we need to pay attention to other features as well in order to understand this. For once, the cult temple was moved from the northern to the eastern side of the pyramid. This in itself indicates a changed focus to the sun and its rebirth, An alteration also reflected in the names given Snofru's pyramids, because they had names. Snofru appears in sunlight. Well, however, let's look inside. Due to the mentioned construction disaster, Snofru would end up building three tomb pyramids, all of which share the same interior feature, an expression of a wish to lift up the king's burial chamber into the core of the pyramid. Even the small cult pyramid down to the right, it looks larger than it is actually in my picture, connected to his second pyramid, the so-called bent pyramid, which is in itself is a result for a building disaster, shows the same pattern. In fact, this small pyramid would provide the blueprint for Snofru's son Cheops, whose well-known pyramid to the left, called the Horizon of Chaos. Again, an obvious focus on the sun god, shows the same pattern, and of course, with the Mortuary Temple on the east side. But then again, why from an engineering point of view go through all these pains to create straight external sides and an interior chamber where the burial chamber must be lifted up within the core? Nobody would enter this space after interment anyway. Well, from an etymological perspective, the Egyptian word pyramid in ancient Egyptian is pa-meher, which means the place of distance. Thus, by descending from the entrance and then move up above the earth, the pyramid would monumentalize and above all effectuate the king's transformation into a god in the sky. A journey down to the underworld, finally to reach the sky in the burial chamber. But how can we tell without text on the wall? Because there are no texts in these pyramids. This will become apparent when we enter the latter half of the Old Kingdom. With the following 5th and 6th dynasties, the latter half of the Old Kingdom, there is a notable decrease in the size of the pyramids and a much larger focus on decoration of the temple walls. But what is most important in this discussion, however, is the new standardized layout of the pyramid interior. We are then physically back in the underworld with the king in his sarcophagus in the western chamber. To reach out, his soul would need to travel from the west towards the east through the antechamber, located exactly under the peak of the pyramid, and out through the corridor towards the north. We can follow the pointers here as you see them in this picture, which actually are based on the reading direction of the texts themselves, the pyramid text. For it is in this situation, at the end of the 5th dynasty, 2350 before Christ, that the walls start to talk in the pyramid of King Unis. From this innovation, the ritual and mythological properties of the chambers can finally be discerned from the voices of the walls. The number of kings whose tombs are inscribed is limited to 5 within this period. A time period of only 200 years, which is not much in Egyptian perspectives. A few prominent queens would enjoy the same honor in their smaller pyramids. The pyramid text is a collection of both individual spells and more or less solid series of spells that must have had a previous cultic ritual life outside the tomb. They were stored in scriptoria, kind of libraries, perhaps located in the temples, and from which the priests and scribes made a collection to be inscribed in the tomb of their king. Although the contents of these spells can vary considerably, and so can their estimated age, we won't go into these issues, but it must be stated from the start, these were texts previously composed to be recited in a cultic ritual context. Thus, at the beginning of each spell, we usually find the instruction, words to be said, that is, recitation. Say this. That is, speak it out aloud. Now, in the blocked off burial compartments, the texts were introduced in a new, dark and mute environment where they no longer could effectuate anything by being read. This was not a literature for any living eye. Their effect would rely on the stone in which they were carved, their eternal presence, and thereby monumentalization. Being distributed within the entire tomb, neither were they stored merely as literature for the dead, which is sometimes said. For this, it would have suffered with a scroll, like the later famous Book of the Dead in the New Kingdom. No, the voices of the spells were transferred to the different parts of the pyramid tomb. They were made present, the voices. They made present the voices from the walls in order to effectuate a transformation, especially laid out by the tomb interior, the monumentalized ritual stage, as we see it here. When it comes to traditional myth, in its sense of narration, we find just fragments within the pyramid texts themselves. The gods interact some more than others, but they do not create narratives. They do not create stories. They create, by their presence, they create rituals. In the following, we will see, for instance, repeatedly encounter gods like Horus, the living falcon god and personification of the sun concept, the concept of the sun as a son, not as the sun god, but as a son, the father's son. Osiris, the deceased, but the resurrected father, will also feature repeatedly, and Re, the sun god, who also is a manifestation of the returned life through his rising in the eastern horizon. Speaking of this veritable triad of Central Egyptian gods, Osiris was in this respect a new god in the Egyptian pantheon that had made his first appearance in offering formulae in private tombs less than 100 years before the introduction of pyramid texts around 2350 BC. He's a pretty young god. There are good reasons to believe, as we shall see, that a larger focus on the death and resurrection of Osiris in the underworld as a mythological prototype for the rebirth of the king was actually manifested once again in the architectural configuration of the pyramid interior. In this respect, Horus would be the loyal son and heir to his father Osiris, who not only succeeded him on the royal throne, but also supervised the royal funeral. Without going into much detail, let us see how this would work. This will also give us insights into the verbal patterns of the texts themselves. Well, in an old debate within Egyptology on the organization of the pyramid texts, there is a general scholarly consent concerning a tendency to locate at least a majority of the same spells to the same chambers in the different pyramids, often even onto the same walls, even if their internal order might vary. In connection with this spatial aspect, one can likewise notice corresponding patterns in editorial thematic assessment of the texts. While the text in the sarcophagus chamber here mainly deal with the offering cult and the resurrection ritual of the king, in a clear reference to the mythological pattern of the god Osiris, the other areas of the tomb are dominated by his ascent to the sky. This movement within the tomb is also mirrored in the king's passive or active role. While here in the sarcophagus chamber, he is generally spoken to without responding. There are exceptions, but in general, he is spoken to without responding. His personal, active voice, I, is primarily heard outside this chamber. Although secondary editing has made these personal, we call them text referential. The king is here now spoken of, but still not addressed as a passive beneficiary. The latter is a clear sign of adaptation of an originally recited collection of spells to its new environment. However, it does not mean that the ritual efficacy was in any way attenuated, diminished. Only that the king continuously was spoken of. He did not speak himself. There were still ritual texts. And since the direction of the text from the inside towards the outside, from the west towards the east, this would also create a spatial transference from a passive to an active state of existence. A long noticed interpretation of the pyramid tone is as a monumentalized, eternalized, ever-present made cosmograph, where the different parts offer symbolic architectural manifestations of different regions in the hereafter. Indeed, this would harmonize exceedingly well with my previous observation in the older non-inscribed pyramids. However, the passive king would in the sarcophagus chamber subterra, as we are dealing with here, no longer find himself in the sky as previously, but in the netherworld, in the underworld, which the Egyptians called the duat, while he would take on an active role in the text in the antechamber, in its turn to be identified with the horizon, the achet. That a transference from the sarcophagus chamber to the antechamber, that is, his appearance in the horizon, was linked to a cosmic reaction coming as a result of an epiphany can be rendered clear already in the first inscribed pyramid of Unis, where the first spell on the west wall, numbered 247, speaks of an arrival that makes the gods shiver. And this is the west wall in the antechamber. And you have the passage from the sarcophagus chamber in the middle down. So up on the gable, it says, recitation, this is text, who shall speak. Your son has acted for you. The great one will shake after they have seen the knife in your hand when they come forth from the underworld, when they come forth from the duat. Apart from the reference to the king leaving the duat, the Egyptian underworld, this brief information immediately on the outside would actually seem to refer to previous cultic acts performed by the son in reference to his father. Your son has acted for you. The dead Osiris king. As this spell is not found in any other pyramid, however, this feature is singular to Unis. But apart from the duat, there is another distinct element in this tententious text, a cataclysm, a cosmic upheaval at the moment of the divine epiphany of the king, a feature that does find parallels in the corresponding opening spells in the antechambers of Unis's successors. We shall see a couple of examples. This is his successor Teti pyramid, the same wall in his antechamber on the west side. If you do not make a place for this Teti, he shall put a curse on his father Geb. The earth will not speak. Geb, that is the earth god, will not protect himself. In the Pyramid of Pepe the first, the next king, the same place. The sky shall speak, the earth shall shake at your ferocity, Osiris, as you make emergence. And the next king, after Pepe the first, Merenre, the sky shall tremble, the earth shall shake at the appearance of this king. So there is a distinct pattern in 4 consecutive pyramids of marking the entry into the antechamber by means of a cataclysm. And this in 4 different spells. That the Egyptians were not interested in our modern numbering system. They were interested in the contents and the efficacy of the spells themselves. So, but what about the performance of Horus referred to in the opening of the pyramid of Unis, but not in the others? Well, this is yet another aspect, that of ritual agency. Who is doing what to whom and where? Who is doing what to whom and where? And we are then back to the observation made at the start that the grammatical structure of the text largely tends to adhere to distinct spatial rules. However, it is not just a matter of second or third voice, that is talking to somebody or talking about somebody. At times, the unknown speaker who addresses the king refers to himself either through name or through the self-referential I. To illustrate how this device could be made a leading principle, spatial organizing principle, organizing ritual principle, we should say, in a specific corpus, we shall now move ourselves into one specific pyramid, as you can see in front of you, the Pyramid of Pepe I, of whose pyramid I actually wrote a doctoral thesis a few years ago, whose corpus of text is the largest of the epigraphic inscribed pyramids. Here the text cover the walls from the sarcophagus chamber all the way out to the ascending passage to the north, right up to its exit, and counting originally approximately 2,264 columns of text. We are not going to go through them all, but we're going to find an organizing principle. So let us start our ritual trajectory, because it's a ritual trajectory in the sarcophagus chamber, where the walls around the sarcophagus were dominated with ritual texts in which the addressed Osiris king received the services of the gods around him under the direction of his son Horus. The western wall is divided, as you can see, into 3 surfaces, given a number of spells, the contents of which mainly address the king in the second person, as we said. And on the gable, the series is finished in the south left corner with a spell called 425, and it says, recitation, Osiris Pepe, you have been tended, as I have given to you all the gods, their inheritance and provisions and their possessions. You will not die. This is what it looks like on the wall. PT 425 is known from a specific sequence of spells found on the same wall further down, but from which it had here been detached when used on the gable. The king in his sarcophagus below is uniformly addressed in the second person, but only here does one find an I that has tended his father, Nej being a word with a broad semantic field as a collective terms for ritual duties. If we then jump over the middle section, dominated by a dialogue between Osiris's father and mother, Geb and Nut, we look closer at the end of the series of the spells covering the main surface here. After another series of ritual proceedings around the Osirian bier, his sarcophagus, the self-referential voice of our head liturgist is heard again by the use of the same spell. So following the pattern of ritual agency on the wall, the rituals performed under the supervision of Horus on the mummy below were twice summarized by the use of the same spell 425 as the text reach the end of the wall. Leaving the immediate sarcophagus area, the great offering ritual on the north wall was always juxtaposed by the so-called resurrection ritual on the south. In both, we mainly find the head liturgist who addresses the passive king. It has been noticed that in the three last epigraphic pyramids, inscribed pyramids of Pepe I, Merenre, and Pepe II, the editors had wall space enough to provide for two mainly fixed liturgical units on the south wall of the sarcophagus chamber, which then constituted parts of what could be called the resurrection ritual. In the second of them, the opening is clearly marked through a self-identification of the liturgist, saying, exactly in the middle point, as you can see, awake, awake, Pepe, awake for me. I am your son, awake for me. I am Horus, who awakens you. This expression is not found in the rest of this liturgical composition, this resurrection ritual on the south wall, but can be regarded as a mode of introduction. Moreover, it's not by chance that it even kicks off approximately in the middle of the wall surface. It's in column 52 out of a total of 100 on the south wall. For if we here thereafter take a look at the eastern wall of the same chamber, you can see we are moving ourselves from the west towards the east through the interior. Approximately apparently and most obviously the last wall to be read before the chamber was left, read like this, because it's not supposed to be read, but it's supposed to be present. The following text, PT 355, is found exactly in the center above the passage to the antechamber. And it's a long text, but we can just concentrate on the things in the bold. You shall come to me, you shall come to me, you shall indeed come to me. Namely Horus, who has tended his father Osiris. I am your Anubis wrapper. The text seems to speak for itself. A reconstitution of the royal body. You can see in the beginning, your head has been knit together for your bones for you. Your bones have been knit together for your head for you. And notice there, the doors of the sky are open for you. The door is below, is the physical passage of the tomb. And we have the I am your Anubis wrapper. Let's move into the passage now to the antechamber. And what happens? Well inside the passage in the antechamber, we find Horus the son again waiting once again for his father. And this, as it happens, in Anubis domicile. Immediately to the left, as you can see, immediately to the left. We have gone all this way around and now to the left. And here you have the text and you have the passage. It's a beautiful wall, inscribed wall. I have come to you, I am your son. I have come to you, Pepe, I am Horus. And you can see here standing monumentalized ritual presence and his voice right by the passage. You can even see here in iconic hieroglyph, the Horus. So he's waiting by the passage for his father. Let's move into the antechamber. The various groups of spells on the western, southern, and northern wall mainly focus, as we said before, on the king's ascent. Spoken in the third person in text that originally had a personal structure, that is, the king spoke for himself. I'm going to the sky. I am this or that god. He identified himself with a multitude of gods in order to attain the sky. He went from passive towards active. But there are exceptions, though, and especially on the western wall, where the last spell, the very, very last spell, even identifies the liturgist again. And now I'm starting to repeat myself, or the tomb is starting to repeat itself, because you can see at the bottom, it is Horus, beloved by this Pepe, Horus, the son who tends his father. Indeed, the variant of the last spell in Mortuary and Pepe II even has it, I am your son, I am your heir. But let's move on. None of this kind of text, where the son identifies himself or is identified, is found on either the northern or the southern wall in the same chamber, as they mainly picture the king's ascent to the sky. However, the thematic focus on the eastern wall of the antechamber, where in all pyramids clearly diverging from the rest of the chamber, giving space for offering text where the king himself took possession of his nourishment. Not was given like in the sarcophagus chamber, here he was active. He took his nourishment by himself, as well as sententious protective spells against obnoxious creatures, so-called snake spells against snakes. The whole idea would be to ward off such inimical beings, mainly serpents, from the serdab, the uninscribed storage, probably for the offerings mentioned in the same text. Anyhow, the editors of Pepe I meticulously divided the wall into two equal sections for the text of provisions of offerings and the apotropaica. In both categories, the king spoke in his own right, even though the later editorial work as so often had changed it from first to third person. But in the last two spells, however, centrally above the small entrance to the passage, centrally, in the last two spells, our friend the liturgist Horus lets his voice be heard once again. Ho, Osiris Merenre, I am your son to whom you gave birth, having come with an offering in your wake. Yes, despite the partly lacunar text, its significance remains fairly clear. This is how the editors finished the provision texts in the 21st of in all 42 columns on the wall, exactly above the passage. Exactly above the passage. Stand up, sit down, throw off the dust that is on you. I shall come and give to you the eye of Horus, that is his offerings. So, we're moving on to the corridor, because we are moving outwards. The text of the corridor mainly thematize, once again, the ascent towards the sky through the celestial fields. However, before attending this trajectory through the corridor towards the sky outside, we must look closer at the western wall by the entrance, containing but one spell called PT 606, but which stands out in comparison with the other spells of the inner corridor. Stand up for me, my father. Stand up for me, Osiris Pepe. It is I, your son. It is Horus. We have the full thing here. He has come, or I have come, editorial treatment, but it certainly is an I here. I am your son. I am Horus, because I am Horus who tends his father. A ritual pattern, I hope, is certainly starting to evolve. At the gate, immediately to the left, just like in the corresponding spot in the passage between the sarcophagus chamber and the antechamber. We're moving back. The son and head liturgist once again approaches his father, identifying himself to prepare a way for him, like a psychopomp, like a psychopomp. So, by the triple portcullis system, the texts, as you can see here, the portcullis system to make the tomb safe. The text of Pepe once ended, but the editors enlarged the corpus at a later stage in the king's reign. Still, they had reached further than in both the Pyramid of Unas and Teti before him. They ended here, but he enlarged, his editors enlarged his corpus, his body of text. And in this, he aligned himself to the general tendency in the evolution of the epigraphic pyramids and extended the individual corpora. However, it was not a matter of squeezing in as much as text possible. As we have seen, they were structured in reference with the physical layout of the chamber system and in accordance with a well-defined ritual pattern. When the editors decided to extend the corpus for the first time also beyond the portcullises, resulting in an exceedingly well-carved wall in terms of arrangement, balance, and sign detail, the first spell, PT 534, was a protective spell which also served to consecrate the by now sealed tomb. This is a very special and much discussed text, but just let's stick to the thematic focus of ours. So how does it begin? Well, you can see it, how it begins. Recitation by Horus, an offering with which Geb has given an offering formula. But then, I have come and consecrated this house for this Pepe. Once again, the liturgist manifests his presence through the I formula, where the extended recitation mark identifies him as Horus. At the time of its inscription, this wall, I repeat myself, once introduced in this way, was with all probability supposed to be the last part of Pepe's pyramid corpus, the final word of his faithful son after having accompanied his father through the entire world. At the time of its inscription, I repeat myself, this wall was introduced in this particular way with all probability, and this spell was with all probability supposed to be the last voice of Pepe's text, the final word of his faithful son after having accompanied his father through the entire tomb by making his presence clear at central points. So, conclude. The ritual agency of Horus especially manifested in the Pyramid of Pepe I. I hope I can make this structure transparent through this picture. The net of ritual activity created by the monumentalized, made presence of the son and head liturgist Horus on exclusively crucial areas of passage throughout the tomb is indeed striking. This pattern is not only a matter of ritual agency, however, but of ritual operative presence, where the combination of architectural figure configuration and text mutually creates a performative structure, that is, a net of sequential ritual acts of transformation along a trajectory as monumentalized in the pyramid chamber system. Although these texts, as we have seen, had a different background in the living cult on the outside, another, as the exegetics call it, the Sitz im Leben. The text had in the tomb been organized and partly reworked and reorganized in order to fulfill their purpose without human interference, without human reading out loud recitation. Certainly, as I am aware of, there is a methodological risk in projecting later patterns, like we have here on earlier material where I started, but I still think we, from the reading of the epigraphic, that is inscribed pyramid, also can get a glimpse into the conceptual processes that were at work in the architectural transfiguration of the pyramids, on the outside as well as on the inside, already at the dawn of the fourth dynasty, that is almost 300 years earlier. The pyramid was not just a visual tomb to safeguard the living memory of its owner. It provided a ritualized space that would effectuate the eternal transformation of the tomb owner within, from death to life. Dixie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niels. A wonderful and thought-provoking talk. And I welcome everyone to ask some questions or open up a debate. Please raise your hands if you would like, or put your question on chat. Niels, can you take out your presentation and remove it from the screen?
Sorry.
Thank
there
you.
You go.
Okay.
So, I see you all.
Okay. Is there anyone who would like to ask some questions or open up a debate on this theme? Yes, Smita. Unmute. How do I unmute? Just a minute. Okay, you can unmute yourself now, Smita.
Yeah.
Yes, right.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for a very insightful presentation, letting us know about the monumentality of death rituals. I'm not an expert in Egyptian history at all, but I'm probably asking more as a layperson a question that came to my mind. What you referred to, that the ritual performance is supposed to be without human interference, probably no recitation of it, it's just there in the Book of Dead. My query would be more about how does it impact the people outside if no ritual is actually taking place? Who all are involved in, and what is the intent? How is the populace outside impacted by these kind of monumental architectures and the so-called rituals performed therein? Thank you.
Unmute yourself.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Never getting used to this Zoom, even though I should. Thank you very much for your question. This is indeed a world, we can only have conjectures here how this would affect. The main thing is that these are not texts to be read and text to be seen. So it's a kind of a thought process in order to understand, I think, for us, how you can indulge, how you can devote so much time. You can see, I mean, it's 2,600 columns, more than that, in the pyramid. And there are even, everyone is decorated, everyone is carved, it's meticulously done, and nobody's going to see it. Nobody's going to read. Nobody's even going to look upon it and be amazed on it like we do today. The rituals reflected in the pyramid text, they were enacted on the outside as well. So the texts were used. So these are ritual texts. Frustratingly enough for Egyptologists and studies of ritual in ancient Egypt, we are not aware, we are not in general not aware in what context they were used. Probably in the funeral, royal funeral, absolutely, most probably, but we cannot be absolutely sure. What we can know is that they have been lifted out of their original Sitzimleben and made present in the concealed tomb. So whatever effect it had on the people on the outside was not a concern for the king within. This was his world, or her world, because there were queens as well. I didn't go into the queens, but this was the world for the king, and it would safeguard his transformation. So what I always think when I go in there and I read the walls, and as you can see, I am Horus. This is a spoken word from the wall at this particular point. So it's not heard by the people on the outside, it's just heard by the king, who is making his eternal travel trajectory towards the exits and the sky. I hope I had a point on your question.
Thank you, thank you. Anyone else?
Can I make a suggestion that the purpose of inscribing or painting these texts on the walls had a ritual effect of making them almost eternally present without any kind of let's say nuances or people who read them. They are just there, and they make the point in being there for those who come in or know that they are in. And this is a very unique kind of a ritual that is performed once but has an everlasting presence.
Yes, and I don't think that this ritual was even enacted. I think this is a what you could say a mute ritual. It's a present-made monumentalized ritual. Parts of it, of course, they know. This is important that the scribes and the priests that make the collection from the scriptoria, they know about these texts. They know their efficacy, and they can organize them in a way that they would actually make this ritual process happen in there. Another point of your comment here is to be made that we can see a number of secondary corrections in these pyramid texts. It was not just writing the stuff on the walls, writing these spells on the walls. If some scribe had misspelled something, even a little sign, that would be a person who came after, like we do today when we check on our papers and everything that we publish, and would say, you have to change this and this and this. This is grammatically wrong. So it had to be correct in correct old ancient Egyptian.
Let me ask a question myself. Niels, who was officiating over the scribes, you know, who was in charge of the scribes who were writing this text?
Oh, that was they were very hierarchical, the Egyptians in general, and yes, we had priests, and they were usually, as far as we can judge, able to write. But what they did, they went into the pyramid, they made a layout, what text are we going to include, and they wrote in what we call hieratic, handwriting.
Right.
And then came the artists. And the artists, they were generally not, they did not necessarily know. We can see that from the mistake they make. Then when they see this sign, they can just make a beautiful hieroglyph, but it's the wrong hieroglyph because it doesn't make sense to them. So that is kind of the human aspect of actually inscribing the pyramid. It's the priests, and they had various categories, but we can expect that the ones responsible for the collection and inscription of the king's tomb, they were the highest priests in the hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, we do not have any names, and that is part of myth, isn't it? And rituals. There is no human name. It's just there. It's just there.
Do we know how long before the king has died, the texts were made, you know, in preparation for his death?
We do not know when they started. This was actually a work in process. What we do know is that these texts, when they appear in the Pyramid of Unas, they were not they were not just composed the other day. They had different ages, and some Egyptologists in yesteryears they would say they are very, very old. Now we think they are probably, the most of the bulk is originating in the early 5th dynasty. So they are about 200 years older than the first appearance in the Pyramid of Unas, which would make it about 2,500. Partly because, I have to finish that, partly because Osiris is such a central god in these texts. And he is a newcomer. I mean, he doesn't appear in Egypt until, 2400 BC, and that is pretty late when you talk to Egyptians.
Anyone else?
Sharon Khalifa, she has a question, and afterwards maybe Arik Moran and Daniela Talmon. Those are the people who wrote.
Okay.
So perhaps Sharon first.
Hello.
Hello, Sharon.
Thank you so much for your talk. I have like a million questions, but I'll try to narrow it into one. Usually, the texts in Egypt are also illustrated. So, and I see this is all blank text, but is there some kind of hierarchy? Some texts are bigger, some texts are, well, you talked about the location. And I was also wondering about the structure, because as you described it, it was like an incubator where the tomb is, and then you have to really lower yourself. You gave a photo where a human stood next to the passing way, and even if they were smaller, they still have to, bend themselves down and then re-emerge. So it's kind of like a metaphor, a living metaphor of a birth. So I was wondering about that.
There is a colleague of mine, a French professor called Vasil Dobrev. He always says that the low passages are because you are forced to bend in front of the divine king. There is absolutely no way of putting this into evidence, but I think it's a good point. So when you if you have been to Egypt and you walk down these pyramids, you have to bend. There is no other way to go, and you feel very, very humbled from a physical point of view when you walk down to this. And I always think of that when I visit Egypt and I walk down. It's just off the record. I just feel humbled. And then I think about my colleague Vasil Dobrev in Cairo, that he might be right after all. When it comes to illustrations, no, there are no illustrations, but we have some, what you could say, manuscripts, some slightly later, where you have these kind of texts, recitation texts, but these are manuals for the priests, and there you can actually have illustrations which show how the priests should do. They are very, very interesting. Unfortunately, very few of them, because they are on papyrus, so they are gone by now. But you can see what gestures that would actually come with these recited spells in order to make them ritually work.
Okay, thank you. The next one, Shai, who is it? Yes. Snigda, yes, please. Yes, unmute.
Thank you for a very fascinating talk. Absolutely, we've learned a lot through this, very enriching. I just have two small questions. One, that was there any difference in the texts that were found for kings and the queens? Is there any difference? And secondly, is there any difference in the rituals that were performed for the king and the queen? So is there a ritualistic difference that we find?
Good question. I can ask the first one. There are no differences in general when it comes to collection of spells. They can have the same spells. The main thing is that you exchanged the name for another person. They were all, from a gender perspective, they were most obviously written for a man. No surprise there. But they could add the woman's name. But sometimes the pronomina would still be in the masculine. So it's quite a, but sometimes, usually they change them as well into her. But sometimes they forgot to do it. They just put in the name. So it was text originally composed for men, that is probably just kings, but then they would be broadened also to be shared by their prominent queens. What are prominent queens? Just to add that, prominent queens in Egypt are generally the king's mothers. When the Egyptian king had a few wives, of course, but the queen who gave birth to the future king would actually also have the pyramid text. We can see that it's a sign of honor to have them. Still, if you didn't have the pyramid text, doesn't mean you had an ineffective tomb. I mean, it's not like that, but it would accentuate, it would emphasize the process that took place in the tomb. Now for the second, we do not know about the funeral rituals. We can have advanced theories about how they looked, what they looked like. But for instance, the funeral ritual, living ritual for the queen, we do not know. We don't have the manuals. They are reflected in the pyramid text. You can see them here and there. They must have been recited, must. Most probably they were recited, but we do not know. Because all again, these pyramid texts are monumentalized, eternalized, and reorganized and adapted text for this environment. They are no longer texts of recitation in a living cult. They are in an eternal cult to be there forever. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. Who is next?
Well, the question from Arik Moran, he actually wrote it. Arik, do you want to read it for us, or should I just read it here? Anyway, Arik wanted to ask the images.
I'm having some, some technical difficulties, so that's why it came out a little gibberishy. But first of all, I wanted just to thank you for a really fascinating lecture.
Thank you.
And second, to ask whether it's just a tiny bit, because I don't know much about this, like I think many of us here. But is there any chance the shaft that goes up in the tomb structures with these birds or falcons that seem to be drawn on it, do we know if maybe at the moment of consecration or when you finish building the pyramid, there would actually be a performance of this kind of ritual with physical live birds being, released out of this shaft? It seems kind of likely just from the images, but I don't know. I was wondering whether we know.
No, there's one of the frustrating things we do not know, but I think it's a wonderful idea. There's a wonderful idea, and this kind of living rituals that we sow. I mean, I'm thinking about it every day. What would actually take place? Then I'm only in the monumentalized, eternalized version, and what people actually did. And of course, a ritual would take different kind of forms, but we have no references to that in this period. No.
Okay, frustrating it is then. Thank you.
Frustrating it is, yes.
There was another question from Daniela Talmon. Daniela, would you like to read it aloud again?
Okay,
Please,
I apologize. I can't use a camera I don't have a camera at the moment. And also I joined in late. So if you addressed this question, please disregard it. But I was wondering if the work of inscribing the text can be regarded as the ritual, the performance of the ritual. And if so, whether we know anything about ritualizing the work of the scribes, who they were, and if they were supposed to use specific materials. This is my question. Thank you.
Yes, this is certainly, and it rings a bell. I mean, unfortunately, I cannot bring it out of my head, but I know that there's a professor in Oxford called John Baines, professor emeritus, who actually brought up, this is a very good question as all the other questions, but this is very, I mean, he had this argument that actually the inscription of the pyramid was a ritualized process. So as you could say, that could be the ritual. Of course, I mean, we might, and we know from later periods that the act of inscribing, the act also of decorating temples and sacred areas and sacred edifices, that was not just a everyday work. I mean, this was in one way or another organized in the sacred perspective, because this is the king's tomb. This is, I mean, this is not everyday life area. And that is also anything made out of stone in Egypt. That is why you see all these stone constructions. They are either temples or tombs. They are holy edifices. So anything that was holy should, after our friend Djoser Netjer with his step pyramid, when he opened the stone, he had made a paradigm shift where ideally every holy, sacred edifice, house, temple, or whatever structure should be in the everlasting material, namely stone. So yes, I cannot put that into proof. I cannot prove what you just asked, but I think that is a very good point in this. Thank you.
Thank you. I was thinking of the transcription of the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, which is a ritual in itself, and it is certainly ritualized.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we are on time now to have the break before our next panel.
May I just say one thing?
Yes, please.
If you, everybody, thank you so very much again. If you have any issues, any questions, anything you want to ask me, please send me an email. Amos has my email address, right, and I would be delighted to answer them.
Yeah.
So please feel welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So we will adjourn in 11:45 for 4 parallel sessions.
Right. Thank you all, and we'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
By the way, Niels, can I ask you another small question?
Sure.
That's okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Unrelated to the burial rituals, but a question about magic and gender, or at least what we know, about whether it were only men who were expected to use Heka, or what we would call magic. What was the view, as far as we can tell, about women using magic rituals? Because in Mesopotamia, you know, we have the Kasaptu, the witch, who was the bad figure, and the Asipu, who was the authorized male figure to use magic. So how was it in Egypt?
In Egypt, I like the Mesopotamian material myself, although that is a long dream to learn how to read Akkadic. Maybe in another life, I don't know. But this is also in Egypt, just thinking very, trying to collect my whatever in my head. This Heka is very much a female thing also in Egypt. And the queen of, or the mistress of Heka, there are a few, but the prime mistress of Heka, that is magic, is the goddess Isis. So the goddess Isis, if you look into her, you will find that she is in charge of the Heka very much often. And sometimes, as you know, as a polytheistic systems, you can bring in other kind of, but they are usually goddesses. And maybe, and this is not my own idea, this is kind of the idea of the Egyptians, that, I mean, this kind of outside the box kind of effectuation, outside the formal rituals, was kind of a female activity, maybe due to their partly exclusion from this organized male activity. So this is just an anthropological, I mean, observation. We can see it in many cultures. So yes, in Egypt as well. But the female sort of magic goddesses, they do not take that kind of, what you could say, dangerous aspects as they do in Mesopotamia. Why, I don't know. I was thinking about it there, of course. I mean, we don't have, you can go down to the underworld. We just left the underworld. We don't find a Ereshkigal in the Egyptian underworld. We find demons and stuff, but nothing like as awful as the goddess of the netherworld in Sumer and Mesopotamia. Yes,
Can I have a follow-up? Can I have a follow-up question for the Shai's question? Well,
Oh,
I
yes.
do have some
Please.
knowledge of Egyptian, but I know that in the New Kingdom, Hathor is one of the main goddesses that appear in the burial chambers. And I was wondering if also Isis and Hathor has some role in the pyramid text.
No, almost nothing. Now, that's a fascinating thing. You find Hathor, I think, in three instances, and she has absolutely no role at all. But on the outside, she's, of course, the house of Horus. That's her name. She's the sky goddess. She's the female aspect of the sun god Re. So the kings of the 5th dynasty, they built a particular special sun temple. But they also built a construction, what they call the merit, which was actually a sanctuary to the female aspect of the sun, the creator god Hathor. But in the pyramid text, she doesn't fulfill any role at all, more or less.
I think it's amazing. It's amazing.
It's another world. It's another kind of genre of texts where she is not needed. Other goddesses appear. Other goddesses, a number of other goddesses, Isis, Nephthys, you just name it, but not Hathor, the biggest one of them all. So you won't find her in the tomb.
Yes, there was a couple of words, two words together, the swimming parts of the king.
Yeah.
Of the body. What does it mean, really?
These texts, they are bound in this kind of misfragments, as we call them. The swimming parts is probably, it's taken from some kind of mythological structure, blueprint story that we don't have anymore. But we know that there was a tradition that Seth, when he had murdered his brother Osiris, and he split up his body and threw them into the Nile.
Oh, right.
And Isis and Nephthys started to collect them. This is taken from later texts where we actually have the narrative of this. As Isis and Nephthys, they go and collect his body and they bring it together, i.e. they construct the mummy. So this is just a reference. So it's like, I mean, when they recited this, the ones who heard it, they would understand the thing. But it's like when you go to church and you go to the mass, you don't have to hear the whole story about Jesus Christ. You just say the body of Christ and everybody understands it.
Right, right. But the soul swims in the Nile after death or not?
The souls.
The souls.
No, they don't. No, they don't. No.
They don't.
No. What? No. Nothing. You can never say no. But that is not a central idea. No.
Right.
But never say no, because you find an exception somewhere.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. Thank you very much, all of you. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.